They called me a thief at 70. They didn't know I was IRS.
The security guards didn't even let me grab my coat, shoving me out into the freezing Michigan rain while the entire town of Cedar Creek watched from the docks. I stood there, 70 years old and shivering, as Julian Thorne stood on the balcony of the marina office and told the crowd I was a thief who had been bleeding the community dry for years. My name is Arthur Vance. For 35 years, I hunted financial criminals for the IRS, the kind of men who hide money in places most people don't know exist. I retired to this quiet lakeside town to fish and forget. But that day, they made me the criminal, and the town believed it in under 10 minutes. 2 years ago, Julian Thorne bought the Cedar Creek Marina. He was 45, had a smile that could sell ice to an Eskimo, and teeth so white they looked like they belonged on a piano. He called himself a visionary. He promised to turn our sleepy little harbor into the Hamptons of the Midwest. He needed a bookkeeper, someone the locals trusted. I took the job because I liked the smell of diesel and the sound of the water hitting the pilings. I thought I was helping a young man build a legacy. I didn't realize I was helping a predator build a cage. The betrayal didn't happen in the dark. It happened on a Tuesday morning, right after the morning fog had lifted off the lake. I was sitting at my desk, the old oak one that smelled like lemon oil, when Julian walked in. He wasn't smiling. He had 2 men with him, private security types with thick necks and no names. "Arthur," Julian said, his voice dripping with a fake, practiced sadness. "We have a problem. A very large, $200,000 problem." I looked up from my ledger, my hand instinctively reaching for the silver whistle in my pocket. "What are you talking about, Julian?" "The accounts are balanced. I closed the month yesterday." He tossed a folder onto my desk. It was filled with wire transfer receipts, all of them bearing my digital signature. They showed tens of thousands of dollars moving from the marina's capital fund into a personal offshore account in the Cayman Islands. My heart didn't race. It went cold. I knew those documents were forged the second I saw the font. "I trusted you," Julian said, raising his voice so the girls in the front office could hear. "I brought you in here like a father figure. And this is how you repay me? Stealing from the dock workers' pension fund? Stealing from the maintenance budget?" "Julian, you and I both know I didn't sign these," I said, my voice steady, though my chest felt like it was being squeezed by a vice. "You're the only other person with administrative access to the wire portal. If money is missing, we need to call the authorities right now and let them trace the IP addresses." Julian laughed, a sharp, ugly sound. "Oh, the authorities are coming, Arthur. But they're coming for you. I've already filed the report. I've got the audit trail. You've been playing the sweet old man routine while you gutted this place. You think because you're 70, people will feel sorry for you. In this town, you don't mess with the marina." I stood up, my joints popping. I'm a tall man, and back in my IRS days, I'd stare down mob-connected accountants without blinking. I stepped toward him, but the 2 goons moved to block me. "You're a small man, Julian," I said, looking him dead in the eye. "You're drowning in debt from those Atlantic City trips you think I don't know about. You're using me as a life jacket, but I'm made of lead. I will drag you down with me." Julian's face contorted, the mask of the charming narcissist slipping for just a second to reveal the rot underneath. "Get him out of here," he hissed, "and make sure everyone sees it. I want him erased from this town." They grabbed me by the arms. I didn't struggle. I've learned that when you're being framed, the more you fight, the guiltier you look. They dragged me through the hallway, past Sarah at the front desk, who was crying into her hands, and out onto the main pier. The rain was coming down in sheets now, that cold Michigan rain that gets into your bones. Julian followed us out, standing on the stairs of the main building. "Look at him," Julian shouted to the mechanics and the boat owners who were huddled under the eaves of the supply shed. "Arthur Vance, the man you all trusted with your slips and your fees. He's been stealing from us. He's the reason the new docks aren't built. He's the reason the holiday bonuses are canceled." The looks I got from those men I'd shared coffee with for 2 years cut deeper than the cold. There was anger, sure, but mostly there was a sense of profound disappointment. I was the old guy who told stories about the government. I was the guy who helped them with their tax returns for free. And now, I was the thief. The security guards threw me toward the parking lot. I fell onto the wet gravel, my palms stinging as they scraped against the stones. My car keys were tossed into the mud next to me. I snatched the silver whistle from the mud where it had tumbled from my pocket, my fingers trembling as I closed them around the cold metal and crawled to my feet. "Don't come back, Arthur," Julian yelled from above. "If I see you on marina property again, I'll have you arrested for trespassing on top of the grand larceny. You're finished." I drove home in a daze, the heater in my old truck barely making a dent in the chill. I pulled into my driveway, a small cottage right on the edge of the water, and sat in the dark for a long time. The silence of the house was deafening. I felt like a ghost. I walked to the window and looked out at the lake. The waves were gray and angry. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the silver whistle. It was tarnished, but it still felt solid. I sank into my old leather armchair, the weight of the day finally breaking me. My hands were shaking. I had no money. Julian had likely flagged my personal accounts as part of the investigation. I had no reputation. I had nothing but a house I couldn't afford to heat and a town that hated me. In the darkness of that living room, hitting the absolute bottom of my life, I closed my eyes and heard it. It wasn't a ghost, just a memory so sharp it felt like a physical touch. It was my father's voice, the way he sounded when I was a boy and I'd messed up a carpentry project. "A man is only as good as his ledger, Arthur." I opened my eyes. The shaking stopped. My father was right. A ledger doesn't lie. People lie. Narcissists lie. Forged documents lie. But the truth is always buried in the numbers. And there wasn't a man alive who could hide a decimal point from me once I started looking. The weeks that followed were a slow, agonizing descent into isolation. Cedar Creek is a small town, the kind of place where news travels faster than a summer storm. By the next morning, my face was on the local news website. By the end of the week, I was a ghost. I went to the local hardware store, Miller's Supply, to buy a new space heater. I'd known Old Man Miller for 15 years. When I walked up to the counter, he didn't even look at me. He just stared at the register. "We don't want your business here, Arthur," he said, his voice flat. "George, we've been friends for a decade," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "You know me. You know I wouldn't take a dime that wasn't mine." "I know what the papers say," George replied, finally looking up. His eyes were hard. "I know my nephew works at the marina, and he's not getting his overtime pay because the accounts are empty. Just leave, Arthur, before I call the sheriff." I left. I walked down the street, and it was like I was carrying a plague. Mrs. Gable, who I used to help carry groceries, crossed the street when she saw me coming. The VFW Post, where I spent every Friday night playing cribbage, sent me a formal letter in the mail. My membership was suspended indefinitely, pending the outcome of the criminal investigation. The isolation was a physical weight. I'd spend my days sitting on my porch, watching the boats go by. I could see the Thorne Marina in the distance, the bright lights of the new restaurant Julian was building, likely with the money he'd stolen and blamed on me. I saw the townspeople flocking there, shaking his hand, laughing at his jokes. He was the hero who saved the marina from the corrupt old bookkeeper. One afternoon, I was at the grocery store, the only one in the next town over where people didn't know my face as well. As I was loading my meager bags into the truck, a group of teenagers from Cedar Creek drove by in a loud, rusted-out Chevy. "Hey, Vance!" one of them yelled. "How's the stolen money taste? Hope you rot in jail, you old fossil." They threw a half-full milkshake at my truck. It splattered across the windshield, a sticky, pink mess. I stood there with my hand on the door handle, watching them drive away. One didn't get angry. I just felt a profound, hollow sadness. I was 70 years old, and I was being hunted by children in the town I called home. My bank accounts were indeed frozen. A preliminary injunction, the bank manager told me over the phone with a voice like cold marble. I was living off the cash I had hidden in a hollowed-out book in my study, about $3,000. It wouldn't last long. The power bill came, then the water bill. I started eating canned soup and toast. I turned the heat down to 55 and wore 3 layers of wool. The lowest point came on a Sunday. I tried to go to the small Methodist church on the hill. I needed to hear a kind word or just sit in a place that smelled like incense and old wood. But as I approached the doors, the usher, a man named Bill, who I'd helped move a piano 3 years ago, stepped outside and crossed his arms. "The board thinks it's best if you pray from home for a while, Arthur," Bill said. "Your presence is distracting to the congregation." "Distracting?" I asked, my voice cracking. "Bill, I've sat in the third pew for 20 years. People are upset, Art. Julian Thorne is a big donor now. He's fixing the roof. We can't have you here making things uncomfortable." I turned around and walked back to my truck. I didn't cry. I was too tired for tears. I drove back to my cold cottage, sat in my chair, and looked at the silver whistle on the side table. I realized then that Julian hadn't just stolen my job or my money. He had stolen my humanity. He had turned me into a monster in the eyes of everyone I loved. He was a master of emotional manipulation, a man who could make the world believe the sun was black if it suited his bank account. But Julian had made one fatal mistake. He thought I was just a bookkeeper. He thought I was a tired old man who would just fade away into the Michigan mist. He didn't know about the 35 years I spent in the basement of the IRS building in Detroit. He didn't know that I had been the lead investigator on the Scarlatti case. He didn't know that I knew how to find money that didn't want to be found. I sat in the dark, the cold seeping through the floorboards, and for the first time in weeks, a spark of the old fire lit up in my gut. Julian Thorne wanted a fight? He was going to get one. But it wouldn't be a fight with fists or shouts. It would be a fight of numbers, and in that arena, I was the king. The transition from victim to predator began on a Tuesday evening, exactly 3 weeks after I was fired. There was a soft knock on my door. I wasn't expecting anyone. I picked up a heavy flashlight, my heart thumping against my ribs, and opened the door a crack. Standing there, shivering in a thick parka, was Sarah Miller. She was the secretary from the marina, the one I'd seen crying when they dragged me out. She looked pale, and her eyes were darting toward the street. "Arthur, please," she whispered. "Can I come in? I can't be seen here." I stepped aside and let her in. She hurried into the kitchen, her hand shaking as she pulled a manila envelope from under her coat. "I shouldn't be here," she said, her voice trembling. "Julian. Hay's been watching everyone. Hay's paranoid. He monitors all our emails, our phone calls. You've been waiting 3 weeks for him to leave town. Hay's in Detroit tonight. This was my only chance." She took a shaky breath. "But I couldn't let it go, Arthur. I saw what he did to the files. I saw him in your office late at night, 2 days before he fired you. Why are you helping me, Sarah?" I asked, setting a glass of water in front of her. "You could lose your job. George Miller is your uncle, and he's already made it clear where he stands." Sarah looked up at me, her eyes filling with tears. My uncle is a fool who believes a shiny suit. But you helped my mom with her estate taxes when my dad died. You didn't charge her a dime, and you sat with her for 4 hours just listening to her stories. You're a good man, Arthur. Julian he's a monster. He's been taking the doc fees and putting them into a development fund that doesn't exist. I found these. She pushed the envelope toward me. I opened it. Inside were copies of internal logs, the stuff Julian thought he'd deleted. It showed the true IP addresses of the wire transfers. They weren't from my computer. They were from a laptop registered to a holding company called Thorne Enterprises. Sarah, do you know what this is? I asked, my voice low. It's proof, isn't it? It's the first thread, I said. If I pull this, his whole world is going to unravel. But I need more. I need the login credentials for the secondary server he keeps in the back room. The one he says is for security footage. Sarah nodded, a look of grim determination on her face. I can get them. He's having a big gala this Saturday. A fundraiser for the new Lakeside Center. He'll be busy charming the donors. I can get into his office then. No, I said, my old investigator instincts kicking in. Don't risk that. Just tell me the manufacturer of the server rack. I'll do the rest. We talked for an hour. She told me how Julian was bleeding the marina dry to pay off a casino debt in Windsor. She told me how he was planning to sell the marina to a massive developer the moment the Lakeside Center was approved, leaving all the local dock owners out in the cold. When she left, I walked her to her car, making sure the street was empty. Thank you, Sarah, I said. Get him, Arthur, she replied. Get him for all of us. I went down to my basement. It was a dry, finished space that I'd mostly used for storing fishing gear. But in the corner, under a heavy canvas tarp, was my old war room setup. I hadn't touched it since I retired. I pulled off the tarp to reveal 3 high-end monitors, a dedicated encrypted server, and a specialized printer. I spent the next 4 days in that basement. I didn't sleep more than 3 hours a night. I was no longer a retired bookkeeper. I was a senior field agent again. I called in every favor I'd earned in 35 years. By Thursday, the numbers were screaming at me, and numbers never lie. I see lies in decimals. And Julian's decimals were confessing everything. Arthur? Is that you? A voice crackled over the phone on Thursday night. It was Hendricks, a guy I trained who was now a regional director. I heard you were in some trouble up there in the sticks. I'm not in trouble, Hendricks, I said, staring at a screen filled with Julian's hidden bank transactions. I'm in the hunt. I need to look at the tax filings for Thorne Enterprises for the last 3 years. And I need it by tomorrow. You know I can't just hand those over, Art. That's a violation of... I'm not asking for the official files, I interrupted. I'm asking for the red flag summaries. The ones the system generates automatically. I know they're there, Hendricks. I wrote the algorithm that flags them. There was a long silence on the other end. Saturday morning, Hendricks said. But you didn't get them from me. I spent Friday building the trap. It was like assembling a watch. Every piece had to fit perfectly. I traced Julian's charity donations and found they were being cycled back into his own accounts through a series of shell companies. I found the forged signatures, the inflated invoices, and the proof that he had been skimming from the town's harbor tax for 18 months. I sat back in my chair at 3 a.m. on Saturday morning. My eyes were bloodshot and my back ached, but I felt a clarity I hadn't felt in years. I looked at the final document on my screen, the smoking gun. It was a direct link between Julian's personal gambling debts and the marina's pension fund. For the first time in months, I felt dangerous. I spent Saturday morning preparing the physical evidence. I didn't want digital files that could be deleted or dismissed. I wanted paper. I wanted something people could hold. I printed out the double books. The real ones Julian kept and the fake ones he'd shown me. I color-coded them. I highlighted the discrepancies. I made 20 copies of a single devastating page, the wire transfer authorization that Julian had signed using my digital ID, but from an IP address located at the Caesars Windsor Casino. I spent the afternoon at my kitchen table, cleaning the silver whistle. My father had been a harbor master. He'd used this whistle to guide ships into the dock during the worst storms Lake Michigan could throw at us. When the fog is thick, he'd say, "You give them a sound they can follow. You give them the truth." I looked at the clock. 6 p.m. The gala at the Cedar Creek Yacht Club was starting in an hour. This was Julian's big night. Every influential person in the county would be there. The mayor, the sheriff, the wealthy summer residents, and the local business owners who had turned their backs on me. Julian was going to announce the grand opening of the Lakeside Center and ask for another $3 million in community investment. I went to my closet and pulled out my best suit. It was a charcoal gray wool blend suit I'd bought for my retirement party. It still fit, though it was a little loose around the waist. I shaved carefully, my hands steady as a rock. I put on a crisp white shirt and a navy blue tie. I looked at myself in the mirror. I didn't see a broken old man. I saw a man who was about to bring the storm. I put the silver whistle in my vest pocket. I packed the manila envelopes into a leather briefcase, the same one I'd carried into the offices of billionaires and congressmen. I drove toward the yacht club. The sun was setting over the lake, painting the sky in bruises of purple and orange. The air was crisp and cold, the kind of night where sound travels for miles over the water. I parked my truck 3 blocks away in the shadows of an old warehouse. I didn't want Julian's security seeing me arrive. I walked toward the lights of the yacht club. I could hear the muffled sound of a jazz band playing inside. I could see the silhouettes of people through the large glass windows, holding wine glasses, laughing, celebrating a lie. Julian would be at the center of it all, glowing in the adoration of a town he was currently robbing blind. I stood in the darkness of the parking lot for a moment, the cold wind whipping at my coat. I reached into my pocket and gripped the silver whistle. My heart wasn't racing. It was beating with a slow, rhythmic precision. I checked my watch. 7:15 p.m. In 15 minutes, Julian would take the stage for his keynote speech. He would talk about integrity, vision, and the future of Cedar Creek. He would probably mention me, the cautionary tale of the man who tried to steal that future away. I walked toward the side entrance, the one the catering staff used. I knew the layout of this building like the back of my hand. I'd been the treasurer of the yacht club for 6 years before Julian arrived and had me removed. I reached the door and paused. I could see my reflection in the glass of the door. I looked calm. I looked like a man who was just going to work. I took a deep breath, the cold air filling my lungs, and gripped the handle of my briefcase. The trap was set. The evidence was undeniable. The narcissist was at the height of his pride, and the town was gathered to witness his crowning moment. I wasn't just going in there to clear my name. I was going in there to perform an audit on Julian Thorne's soul. I pushed the door open and stepped into the warmth of the building. The smell of expensive catering and perfume hit me. The music was louder here. I could hear Julian's voice over the speakers, performing a final sound check in the main ballroom. Testing 1, 2. Julian's voice boomed, full of that oily, practiced confidence. Is everyone having a good time tonight? A cheer went up from the crowd. I stood in the hallway, hidden by a decorative screen, and adjusted my tie. I looked at the silver whistle one last time before tucking it away. It was time to guide the ships home. I stood in the service hallway of the Cedar Creek Yacht Club, the heavy oak door clicking shut behind me. The air inside smelled of expensive perfume, prime rib, and a kind of unearned confidence that only comes with a high-limit credit card. I adjusted the lapels of my charcoal suit. My heart was a steady drum in my chest, not racing, but heavy. I knew every inch of this building. I'd helped audit the club's construction costs back in the 90s. I knew which floorboards creaked and which hallways led to the service elevators. I began to move toward the main ballroom, my leather briefcase a dead weight in my hand. I had to time this perfectly. Julian was scheduled to speak at 7:30. It was currently 7:15. I just needed to reach the AV booth at the back of the room without being spotted by Julian's hired muscle. I turned the corner near the kitchen, and that's when the world stopped. Standing right in front of the double swinging doors was Mike. He was one of the security guards who had tossed me into the mud 3 weeks ago. He was a big man, 30 years younger than me, with a neck like a bull and a radio clipped to his belt. He was leaning against the wall, picking a piece of steak out of his teeth with a toothpick. He looked up and his eyes narrowed. The recognition was instant. He didn't say a word. He just stood up straight and reached for his radio. "Vance?" Mike's voice was a low growl. "What the hell are you doing here? You were told to stay off marina property." "The yacht club counts, old man." My mind raced. If he keyed that radio, Julian would have 4 more goons on me in 60 seconds. I'd be back in the parking lot before I could open my briefcase. I had to use the one thing Julian didn't think I had left: authority. I didn't back away. I stepped toward him. I didn't look like a victim. I looked like a man who was about to ruin his life. I lowered my voice, making it as cold and sharp as a Detroit winter. "Put the radio down, Mike," I said. "I'm not here as a former bookkeeper. I'm here as a senior field agent with the Internal Revenue Service. I am currently executing a pre-seizure audit under Title 26 of the United States Code. If you interfere with a federal officer in the performance of his duties, you won't just be out of a job. You'll be looking at 5 years in a federal penitentiary for obstruction of justice." Mike froze. His hand was an inch from the radio. He looked at my suit. He looked at the leather briefcase. He looked at the sheer, icy calm in my eyes. He didn't know that I had retired years ago. He didn't know that my federal authority was currently backed by nothing but a silver whistle and a stack of paper. I have orders from Mr. Thorne," Mike stammered. "Mr. Thorne is the primary subject of a criminal investigation involving grand larceny and wire fraud," I said, stepping even closer so I could smell the cheap aftershave on his neck. "Do you want to go down with the ship, Mike? Or do you want to step aside and tell the investigators later that you cooperated? Because right now, your name is at the bottom of a very long list. I can move it to the top, or I can cross it off. It's up to you." The toothpick fell out of his mouth. He looked at the radio, then back at me. I could see the gears turning. He was a bully, and bullies are always the first to fold when a bigger dog enters the yard. "I'm just doing my job," he muttered, stepping back. "Then do it somewhere else," I snapped. "Go to the front entrance and stay there. If you mention my presence to Julian Thorne, I will personally ensure the DOJ looks into your personal tax filings for the last 5 years. Am I clear?" He nodded, his face pale. He turned and walked away toward the lobby, his boots clicking rapidly on the tile. I waited until he disappeared around the corner before I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. My hands were shaking. I gripped the handle of my briefcase until the leather bit into my palm. I couldn't go to the AV booth now. Mike might change his mind, or someone else might see me. I needed a place to disappear until the moment was right. I slipped through a side door onto the narrow balcony that overlooked the main ballroom. It was dark out here, the air biting and cold, but it gave me a perfect view of the stage. I retreated into the deepest shadows, pressing my back against the cold stone of the building. And then I waited. This was the longest hour of my life. The jazz band below was playing something upbeat, but to me, it sounded like a funeral march. I could see the top of Julian's head. He was moving through the crowd like a shark in a koi pond. He was patting backs, kissing cheeks, and flashing those white teeth. He looked untouchable. I looked down at my hands. They looked so old in the moonlight. The skin was thin, the knuckles swollen with arthritis. I felt a sudden, crushing wave of doubt. What was I doing? I was a 70-year-old man hiding in the dark like a thief. I had no backup. I had no badge. If this failed, Julian wouldn't just humiliate me. He would use his influence to make sure I spent the rest of my life in a cell. The weight of it felt like a physical pressure on my chest. My legs were starting to go numb from the cold. A dull ache started in my lower back and radiated down to my hips. Every time a waiter opened the balcony door to empty an ashtray, my heart jumped into my throat. I squeezed myself further into the shadows, smelling the damp stone and the faint scent of lake water. I thought about the church. I thought about Bill, the usher, telling me I wasn't welcome. I thought about George Miller turning his back on me at the hardware store. The isolation of the last 3 weeks came back to me, a cold, hollow ache that was worse than the Michigan wind. I felt like a ghost watching a world that had already forgotten him. I thought. But then, my hand brushed against the silver whistle in my vest pocket. The metal was cold, but the memory it triggered was warm. I remembered my father standing on the docks during the storm of '78. The wind had been howling so loud you couldn't hear a man scream, but that whistle had cut through the chaos. It had told the ships where the land was. It had told them where the truth was. I wasn't a ghost. I was the storm. I took a deep breath, the freezing air stinging my lungs. I focused on the physical sensations to keep the panic at bay. I felt the rough texture of the stone wall against my blazer. I felt the rhythmic throb of the bass from the band below. I counted my breaths 4 seconds in, 4 seconds out. The doubt didn't disappear, but I pushed it into a corner of my mind and locked the door. I had spent 35 years following the money. I had seen men more powerful than Julian Thorne cry like children when the numbers finally caught up to them. Julian wasn't a visionary. He wasn't a hero. He was just a decimal point out of place, and I was the one who was going to correct the ledger. I checked my watch. 7-20-9. Below me, the music stopped. The mayor of Cedar Creek, a man named Higgins, who had a stomach like a beer keg and a voice like a foghorn, stepped up to the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," Higgins boomed. "If I could have your attention, please." The room went quiet. The clinking of silverware died down. I stood up, ignoring the protest of my knees. I picked up my briefcase. My shadow stretched out long and thin across the balcony floor. "Tonight is about the future," the mayor continued. "And no one represents that future better than the man who saved our marina. A man of vision. A man of integrity. Please join me in welcoming Julian Thorne." The applause was thunderous. I saw Julian step onto the stage, his arms raised as if he were a conquering king. He took the microphone, his smile radiating enough heat to melt the ice on the lake. "Thank you, Mayor," Julian said, his voice silky and perfect. "And thank you, Cedar Creek. You know, they say a man's character is built in the quiet moments, but I believe it's built in the moments of crisis. When we discovered the betrayal in our own ranks, when we saw the theft that threatened our very community, we didn't blink." I stepped out of the shadows and walked toward the balcony stairs. "We stood tall," Julian continued, his voice rising in drama. "We removed the rot. And tonight, as we look toward the new lakeside center, we do so with clean hands and a clear conscience." I reached the bottom of the stairs and pushed through the heavy velvet curtains. I walked into the light of the ballroom. I didn't rush. I walked with the slow, deliberate pace of a man who knows exactly how the story ends. Step 1. The dismissal. I walked straight down the center aisle. The room was packed, 200 people in tuxedos and gowns. As I moved, the whispers started. It was like a wave of static following me. People nudged each other. I saw Mrs. Gable drop her wine glass. I saw George Miller's jaw hang open. Julian didn't see me at first. He was too busy looking at his own reflection in the eyes of the front row. But then, the mayor leaned over and whispered something, pointing a trembling finger toward the aisle. Julian's smile didn't vanish. It just froze. It became a mask of plastic. He gripped the podium so hard, his knuckles turned white. "Arthur?" Julian said into the microphone, his voice dripping with a fake patronizing pity. "Arthur Vance. My goodness. I suppose we should have expected this." The mind starts to go, and the confusion sets in. He looked at the crowd, inviting them to laugh. A few people chuckled nervously. "Arthur, this is a private event," Julian said, his voice growing firmer. "You've already caused enough pain to this town. Don't make this more embarrassing for yourself. Security? Please escort Mr. Vance to the exit. And call the sheriff. I believe we have a restraining order in place." 2 guards started moving toward me from the sides of the room. I didn't stop. I walked until I was 10 feet from the stage, right in the center of the spotlight. "I'm not here to talk to you, Julian," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but I'd spent decades speaking in courtrooms. I knew how to make a word carry. "I'm here to talk to the board of directors. And to the people whose pensions you've been using to pay off your markers at the Caesars Windsor Casino." The room went deathly silent. The 2 guards hesitated, looking at each other. The word pension has a way of stopping people in their tracks in a town like this. "That's enough," Julian shouted, his face turning a dark, ugly shade of red. "He's delusional. He's a thief who's trying to deflect his own crimes onto me. Get him out of here now." Step 2. The denial. The guards grabbed my arms. I didn't struggle. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a single sheet of paper, held high so the people in the front row could see the red audit stamp at the top. "This is a wire transfer authorization," I said, my voice steady. "Dated October 14th. It shows $50,000 moving from the Marina Capital Fund to a shell company called Thorne Holdings. It bears my digital signature. But here's the problem, Julian." I looked at the mayor, then at the head of the Marina board, a woman named Diane who I'd known for 30 years. "The IP address used to authorize this transfer didn't come from my office," I continued. "It came from a secure terminal at the Caesars Windsor Casino. I have the logs from the Gaming Commission. Julian, you were at the craps table when this money was stolen. Do you want to tell the room how I managed to be in 2 countries at once?" Julian laughed, but it was a high, thin sound. He wiped a bead of sweat from his forehead with a silk handkerchief. "This is pathetic, Arthur," Julian said, looking at the crowd. "A forged document to cover a forgery? You're a forensic accountant. We all know you can make a piece of paper say whatever you want. This proves nothing but your own desperation. You're a sad, lonely old man who couldn't keep his hands out of the till. Is that right?" I asked. I pulled out a second folder. "Then let's talk about the Lakeside Center. The project you're asking these people to invest another $3 million in tonight. That project is the future of this town." Julian yelled. "That project doesn't exist," I said. "I've spent the last 4 days looking at the building permits and the environmental impact studies. They're all fakes, Julian. You haven't even filed for a zoning variance. The architect you've been paying, he's a cousin of yours in Florida who's been disbarred for 3 years. You're not building a center. You're building a getaway fund." A murmur rippled through the room. People were standing up now, looking at the mayor, looking at the board. The air in the room had changed. The adoration was curdling into suspicion. Step 3. The bargaining. Julian stepped down from the podium. He moved toward the edge of the stage, leaning down as if he were trying to have a private conversation, though the microphone was still live in his hand. "Arthur, listen to me," he whispered, though the speakers carried his voice to the back of the room. "You're confused. You're making a scene. Why don't we go into the back office? Just you, me, and the mayor. We can look at the books together. If there's been a mistake, a clerical error, I'm sure we can settle this. I'll even drop the charges. I'll give you a generous retirement package. 6 figures, Arthur. Think about your cottage. Think about your future." I looked at him. Up close, the charming narcissist was gone. His eyes were wide and darting. He looked like a cornered animal trying to find a hole in the fence. "You're offering me a bribe, Julian?" I asked. "In front of the entire town?" "It's not a bribe," Julian hissed, his voice cracking. "It's a settlement. I'm trying to help you. You're trying to buy my silence because you know the FBI is already looking at the wire fraud," I said. "But I don't want your money. I want my name back. And I want the keys to the marina." Julian's face contorted. The mask finally shattered. He stood up straight and pointed a finger at me, his voice booming with a desperate, shaky rage. "You'll get nothing," he screamed. "You're a dinosaur. You're a relic. No one believes you. I am the one who brings money to this town. I am the one who makes things happen. You're just a bean counter who's mad because the world passed him by." Step 4. The fracture. I turned away from Julian and looked at the mayor. "Mayor Higgins," I said, "you've known me for 20 years. You know I don't make accusations I can't prove. Julian told you that the reason the holiday bonuses were canceled was because I stole the money. Isn't that right?" The mayor nodded slowly, his face grim. "That's what he told the board, Art." "Well, Julian," I said, turning back to the stage, "I think it's time you told the mayor why you've been secretly negotiating to sell the marina to the Northport Development Group. The deal is set to close next Friday. And according to the contract Sarah Miller found for me, the first thing Northport is going to do is bulldoze the local slips to make room for a private yacht club that none of these people can afford." The room erupted. This was the wedge. In Cedar Creek, the marina wasn't just a business. It was the heart of the town. The idea of it being sold to outsiders was the ultimate betrayal. "That's a lie," Julian screamed, turning toward the mayor. "Higgins, don't listen to him. It's a partnership. A merger. A merger where you walk away with $5 million and the rest of us lose our docks." Diane, the board head, shouted from the front row. She stood up, her face white with fury. "Is that the vision you were talking about, Julian?" "I did it for the marina," Julian yelled, his eyes darting toward the exit. "We needed the capital. Higgins, you knew we were struggling. I didn't know you were selling us out, Julian." The mayor roared, his face turning purple. "You told me that money was for the roof. You told me Arthur stole it." Julian turned on the mayor, his empathy zero nature finally revealing its teeth. "You fat idiot. You signed the papers. You were so happy to take those campaign donations I gave you that you didn't even read the fine print. If I'm going down, you're coming with me." The mayor froze. The crowd gasped. The betrayal was complete. The narcissist had turned on his last ally. Step 5. The kill shot. Julian realized what he'd just admitted. He looked around the room, seeing 200 faces filled with pure, unadulterated loathing. He saw his world crumbling in real time. He looked at the guards, but they had stepped back, their arms crossed. They weren't his muscle anymore. They were witnesses. "It doesn't matter," Julian whispered, his voice shaking. "You have no proof of the casino. You have no proof of the fraud. It's my word against a disgraced old man. I'll have my lawyers tie this up for 10 years. You'll be dead before I ever see a courtroom." I smiled. It was the first time I'd smiled in 3 weeks. "I don't need 10 years, Julian," I said. "I only needed 10 minutes. In that moment, I felt it. I was human again. I reached into my vest pocket and pulled out the silver whistle. I put it to my lips and blew. The sound was piercing. It was a high, sharp note that cut through the murmurs and the tension, echoing off the high ceilings of the yacht club. It was the sound of the truth coming home. The side doors of the ballroom swung open. 4 men in dark windbreakers entered. They didn't move like local police. They moved with the quiet, efficient precision of federal agents. At the lead was a man I recognized, Hendricks, my former trainee, now a regional director. Julian's eyes went wide. He stepped back, tripping over the microphone cord. "Julian Thorne," Hendricks said, his voice amplified by the silence of the room. "I'm Special Agent Hendricks with the IRS Criminal Investigation Division. We have a warrant for your arrest for wire fraud, embezzlement, and money laundering. We also have a seizure warrant for all assets held by Thorne Enterprises." Julian looked at me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. You called them? You're retired. You have no standing." "I didn't call them as an agent, Julian," I said, walking up the steps onto the stage until I was standing right in front of him. "I called them as a whistleblower, and as a man who knows exactly where you hid the second set of books. They're in the floor safe of your summer house in Petoskey. The code is your mother's birthday." Julian slumped. The arrogance drained out of him, leaving behind nothing but a small, hollow man in an expensive suit. He didn't fight as the agents turned him around and clicked the handcuffs onto his wrists. He didn't even look at the crowd as they led him away. He just stared at the floor, his white teeth hidden behind a trembling lip. The room was silent as the doors closed behind them. I stood on the stage, the spotlight still on me. I looked out at the people of Cedar Creek. I saw George Miller. I saw Bill the usher. I saw the men I'd shared coffee with for years. They were looking at me with a mixture of shock and profound shame. George took a step toward the stage, his hand extended as if to apologize, his eyes wet. I didn't wait for the apology. I didn't need the applause. The handcuffs clicked shut with a finality that echoed in the sudden silence of the ballroom. I didn't stay to hear the mayor's excuses or the town's apologies. I walked out the side door and into the crisp, biting night air. The smell of wood smoke and wet pine filled my lungs, clean and honest. I reached into my pocket and felt the cool, solid weight of the silver whistle. I walked to my old truck, the gravel crunching under my boots, and started the engine. As I drove home along the dark lake road, the moon rose over the water, casting a long, silver path that led all the way to my door. 6 months later, I was sitting on my dock, a fishing rod in my hands and a thermos of coffee at my feet. The morning mist was rising off the lake, turning the water into a sheet of silver glass. It was the kind of quiet that only comes after a storm has passed. Julian Thorne was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. Wire fraud, embezzlement, money laundering, the charges stacked up like cordwood. Hendricks told me that the forensic team found another $2 million, hidden in offshore accounts that even I hadn't discovered. Julian had been running this scheme long before he came to Cedar Creek. We weren't his first victims. We were just the ones who caught him. The Northport development deal collapsed the day after the arrest. Without Julian's signature, the contract was void. The marina stayed in local hands, just as it should have been all along. The board offered to rename the main pier after me. I told them to name it after my father instead. He was the one who taught me that the truth is worth fighting for, even when you're standing alone in the dark. Mayor Higgins resigned 2 weeks after the gala. The campaign donations Julian had mentioned turned out to be a lot more than donations. They were bribes, plain and simple. The state attorney general opened an investigation, and last I heard, Higgins was facing 3 counts of public corruption. He sent me a letter asking if I would testify on his behalf, saying he'd been manipulated by Julian. I threw it in the fire without reading past the first paragraph. George Miller came to my door on a Saturday morning, about a month after the trial ended. He was holding a bottle of whiskey, the good stuff, not the cheap bourbon he usually drank, and he couldn't look me in the eye. "Arthur," he said, his voice rough, "I don't know where to start." I believed him. I looked you in the face and told you to leave my store, and I believed every word that Snake said. "I'm sorry. I'm so damn sorry." I looked at him for a long moment. Part of me wanted to close the door. Part of me wanted to remind him of every cold word, every turn back, every whisper that followed me through town like a shadow. But I thought about my father. I thought about the silver whistle and what it meant, guiding ships through the fog, not letting them crash on the rocks. "Come in, George," I said. "I think we both could use a drink." We sat on my porch as the sun set over the lake, passing the bottle back and forth. He told me how Julian had worked the town, the private lunches, the generous loans, the way he made everyone feel like they were part of something special. Had been a master manipulator, and George wasn't the only one who'd fallen for it. "He made us feel important," George admitted, shaking his head. "And when he pointed the finger at you, it was easier to believe him than to ask questions. I'm ashamed of that, Art. I'll be ashamed of it for the rest of my life. Shama's a heavy thing to carry," I said. "But it's lighter when you share it." Not everyone came to apologize. Bill, the usher from the church, sent me a letter. It was long, full of excuses about protecting the congregation and difficult decisions. I read it once, then folded it up and used it as kindling for my wood stove. Some apologies come too late, and some people don't deserve the peace of forgiveness. Bill was one of them. The church, for what it's worth, removed Julian's name from the donor plaque on the new roof. They sent me an invitation to return to my pew. I haven't gone back. Maybe I will someday. Maybe I won't. A man's relationship with God doesn't need a building. Sarah Miller was promoted to marina manager. The board voted unanimously. She was the one who had risked everything to bring me the evidence, and they knew it. She stopped by my cottage a few weeks after she started, bringing a basket of homemade bread and a bottle of wine. "They want you back, Arthur," she said, sitting at my kitchen table. "The board, they want you to come back as the head bookkeeper. Full salary, benefits, the whole thing. They said it's the least they can do." I smiled and shook my head. "I appreciate that, Sarah. I really do. But I'm done with ledgers. I spent 35 years following the money, and another 2 years watching it destroy everything I cared about. I think I've earned the right to just sit on my dock and watch the boats go by." She nodded, though I could see the disappointment in her eyes. "What will you do?" I looked out the window at the lake. "Fish. Read. Maybe build a birdhouse or 2. You've got a cottage that's paid off, a truck that runs, and a town that finally knows the truth. That's more than enough for a man my age. The silver whistle sits on my mantel now, right next to the photograph of my father. He's standing on the Cedar Creek dock in that picture, taken back in '72, the year before he retired. He's wearing his harbor master uniform, and he's got that same whistle around his neck. He looks proud. He looks like a man who did his job and did it well. I think he'd be proud of me, too. Last week, I was out on the lake at dawn, my line in the water, when a small boat puttered up alongside me. It was old man Kowalski, a retired fisherman who'd been avoiding me for months. He cut his engine and let his boat drift until we were side by side. "Vance," he said, squinting at me in the early light, I heard what you did. I heard how you got him. I nodded, not sure what to expect. I was wrong about you, Kowalski said. We all were. I just wanted you to know. I'm glad you didn't give up. This town needed someone to tell the truth, even when it hurt. He started his engine and puttered away before I could respond. I sat there for a long time, watching his boat disappear into the mist. Then I reeled in my line, poured myself another cup of coffee, and watched the sun rise over Cedar Creek. My father used to say that a man is only as good as his ledger. I used to think he meant the numbers, the debits and credits, the dollars and cents. But I understand now. He meant the ledger of a life. The things you do when no one is watching. The choices you make when everything is on the line. Julian Thorne's ledger was full of lies, and in the end, the numbers caught up to him. My ledger, well, it's got its share of red ink. But when I close my eyes at night, I can sleep. And when I wake up in the morning, I can look at myself in the mirror. That's worth more than any pension. That's worth more than any apology. The lake was calm that morning, the water so still it looked like glass. I reached into my pocket out of habit, but the whistle wasn't there. It was on the mantel where it belonged. I didn't need it anymore. The storm had passed, and the ships had found their way home. I picked up my rod, cast my line into the silver water, and waited for the fish to bite. They say you reap what you sow. Sometimes justice comes fast, and sometimes it takes time. But one thing is certain: bad deeds never go unpunished. If you enjoyed the story, hit like. And if you believe justice was served, subscribe. Let's watch karma do its work together.